This tweet made $819,000. Well, not exactly. Let me explain. Meet Jonny Miller. He's the creator of Nervous System Mastery, a 5-week live course that gives you a toolkit to regulate your nervous system, build resilience, and reduce stress. This course started with that very tweet back in 2021 when Jonny only had 4,000 followers on Twitter. Since then, Nervous System Mastery has run 6 times and earned a total of $819,000. In this episode, Jonny breaks down exactly how that happened and everything he learned in the process.
So I'm currently in week 3 of cohort 6. And this cohort, we have, I believe, 186 students and 73 returning alumni. So it's a pretty big cohort. And the last cohort 5, was 250 new students, and I think about 120 returning alumni. So it's kind of grown to a size which is beyond what I could have comprehended about 3 years ago.
So when you say 186 students, 73 returning, would that be a total of 250 then, 259?
Yes, and then there's also a number of people that I've given scholarships to as well. So I think the total numbers are around about like 175, 180, something in that region.
And what has this done in terms of revenue in these 6 cohorts?
Yeah, so I just pulled up the numbers in ThriveGuard here, and the gross revenue is 819,000, which is kind of absurd to to see that number.
Crazy.
And that's been over the six cohorts.
When did you run cohort 1?
It was during COVID, and I the backstory was I'd been working as a coach initially and working with kind of founders and execs. And I then ran a series of workshops on emotional resilience. This was to kind of tech leaders. And in those workshops, the piece that really stood out was like the energy management and the nervous system work. And I was like, I feel like there's like something here. And so one morning, we were living in Bali at the time, I just wrote down sketched out a kind of backbone of like a 5-week curriculum and what that could look like. And I shared that. This was in Notion. I shared that as a screenshot on Twitter. And I was like, I'm thinking about doing this thing called Nervous System Mastery. Would anyone be interested? I remember a bunch of people replied and said, like, this sounds really cool. And then 2 people said, like, where can I sign up for this? And so I did the thing of like, go to Stripe, make the payment link. It was like $100 deposit or whatever it was. And 2 people sent me money. And I was like, wow, I wasn't expecting that kind of response. And the first cohort ended up being, so this was almost 3 years ago, I think, 2021. And the first cohort ended up having like 70 people go through it, I think, which was also surprising to me because although I had an audience through Curious Humans and through my newsletter, it was maybe like 2,000 or 3,000 people on the email list. And I'd never really sold anything before. This was the first thing that I'd actually like created that was a product. So it was very fun, very rewarding, very chaotic. I was like doing the curriculum in real time, that kind of thing where like, this is what I think it's going to be. And then every week I was doing the pre-recorded curriculum and then teaching the live class. So it was very intense, the first cohort that I ran, and pretty scrappy, but it also worked and got good testimonials and got enough feedback to be like, okay, let's keep this going.
I love that because if you think about what you just said, we're talking about basically a 4-year timeline to create a product that has done nearly $1 million in revenue all time. That started from a tweet that was built on the fly in version 1. And obviously it's continued to improve because not only are you getting more students, but you're getting a ton of people returning and doing more. What were your expectations of this when you ran that first cohort? Did you expect that this could be what it has become?
I mean, no way. No way. I knew that I really enjoyed teaching and curriculum design. So before Bali, kind of several years ago, I taught a course on entrepreneurship in London with this company called Escape the City. And I knew that I really enjoyed the process of a kind of experiential learning design, and also how do you convey complex ideas in a way that is fun, in a way that like lands for people. So I think in the back of my mind, there was this like I really want to get more into like the teaching side of things. And at the time I was doing like some freelance marketing and some like a small amount of coaching as well. And so I was excited to kind of give it a try, but I really had no expectations of what it would turn into.
Are there other people that are teaching this subject matter? Maybe there might be more now, but think back to the beginning. Were you aware of other people that were teaching this type of thing?
No one at all. No one at all. And particularly not to the audience that I was kind of pitching to, which is more of like the kind of high performing tech based. It's definitely broadened since then, but it was initially the kind of typical like high achieving person.
From the outside, I would expect that novelty is a big part of why it's been so successful so quickly. Obviously matched with great teacher, delivers on the promise, but this differentiation that you had out of the box, I think is a big part of the story that plays a big role. But feel free to push back on that and tell me if you think that's not the case.
No, I think it definitely is the case. And I think that in some ways I got kind of lucky with the name as well. Like I think about like Rite of Passage, for example, which was like the kind of archetypal cohort-based course. And the name, it like draws you in and you want to learn more. And I think nervous system mastery, the first time most people hear it, it's like, wait, you can master your nervous system? Like what the hell? Like kind of like you want to lean in and learn a little bit more about that. And I think that also in terms of timing, towards the end of COVID, people had been indoors for a long period of time. There was like anxiety was at all-time high, burnout. And so I think there was a timing aspect of it as well.
And I don't say that at all to undermine your credibility or what you've accomplished. And I don't want people to think like, oh, so timing and luck and these things that are out of my control are a reason why things succeed. What I'm trying to actually say is when you think about these things intentionally, like there are varying degrees of intention you can have in how you develop a product. Saying, having a name that draws people in, that's an intention you can have when you design this so that you think on this and come up with a name. Maybe it comes to you really easily and it's the first thing to your mind. Maybe it's not. Did you have other names that were in the running?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. I think it was going to be Emotional Resilience was like the first name, the first iteration. That was the name of the workshops. And then I realized that in the breathwork training that I'd done, the nervous system was kind of the central thread through a lot of the stuff I was interested in. And I was like, it just seems interesting. And it seems like very under talked about. And so, yeah, I just followed a gut feeling basically.
Yeah. I like the word mastery too, because it's very aspirational, and it's outcome oriented. It feels like not only am I going to learn this, I'm going to be extremely good at it. I find that sometimes when people create product names, it feels like the name of the product is speaking more to a luxury than something people really want or want to stop in some cases, want to end some outcome that they want. So I'm glad we landed on nervous system mastery. I think it's really, really solid. I
thought about naming it like the other courses and programs that are similar to this are more focusing on like the pain. It's like heal your anxiety or like recover from burnout. And I think something in me wanted it to be more aspirational and more that like this isn't just about going from like I'm in a really tough place to baseline. It's about no, you can like really walk this journey of mastery. So I think that was important for me as well.
Okay, so talk to us about cohort 1. You said you were building this on the fly. Can you talk about the experience of that and maybe even start with the format of it? Because I'm curious to know if the format of the course itself has changed over the last 4 years.
I built the entire thing in Notion and Super. The landing page and then every curriculum was kind of like a private Notion page for each of the 5 weeks. I used Discord, I think, for the community in the first cohort, which I actually regretted because it was like the opposite of a kind of nervous system friendly environment where you have like
that is my experience
emojis
in Discord
and notifications, and so many people were like this community thing is really stressing me out. Like I don't want anything to do with this.
And this was during the time of like NFTs gone wild.
Yeah.
So that would have been like the
Discord.
opposite experience for me, I feel.
Yeah, exactly. So use Discord and Notion was basically the teaching stack, and Zoom, obviously. And I think on Monday, I sent this like core curriculum I recorded the audio into a mic, and then I also provided the text for people to read, depending on what they wanted to do. And there was some theory and some practices each week. And then Friday was kind of the call to experience it in a bit more depth and also ask questions and reflect. And that was kind of the loose structure in the beginning.
Talk to me about your experience with the nervous system in the first place, because I could see a world where if you're not a doctor or, studying this at a collegiate level, you might feel like, can I teach this thing that I have gotten some experience around, but may not have the academic background for? Talk to me about your background, where this came in, and how you decided that you were able to teach this.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. And I think something that I definitely wrestled with in the beginning, and still comes up sometimes, in that other people in this space, they have PhDs, they have affiliations with like Harvard or Yale or some of these big academic institutions. And I think that what gave me the confidence to kind of go through with it is that I've been teaching from my own lived experience, and I've been learning practices, often not from academia directly. I've been kind of doing my own citizen science research to kind of back up as much as I can. But each of the weeks are something which I've found to be really supportive and helpful in my own life. And it feels like the curriculum has come from me. And so because of that, I don't feel that I need any, other people might disagree, but I don't feel like I need a certificate or a kind of badge of approval from some institution. And I've met many people who have those badges, so to speak, and I'm often not impressed. So I personally place less weight in those types of accolades.
Well, again, the point I'm trying to make is when you learn something, know something, experience something, you can teach your experience and other people can benefit from it. There is not some grantor of permission to say, now you have earned the right in my eyes. No, it's here's what I know and I'm willing to teach it. And if you want to learn it from me, you can do that. I had a similar experience when I made Creator HQ in Notion. I'm not a Notion, what's the word? I'm not one of the what's the word? I'm not a certified Notion consultant.
Right.
I have since become a Notion ambassador. But to build a product in Notion, at first it's like, am I allowed to do that? But then again, yeah, I'm using it. If you want to use the thing I'm using, here it is. And so I hope that people hear this and get permission to say, my own lived experiences, I have the right to teach what I have learned through them.
Yeah, I love that so much. And it reminds me of, there was an exercise we did in this startup tribe that I was a part of, where we invited the students to write their own permission slip for whatever it is they wanted to do. And I think that self-permissioning is such a core part of the creator path. And it's something that I guess I learned a while ago and now has just become part of the way that I work.
And if video is a part of how you work as a podcaster, you'll want to hear this update from today's sponsor. Creators like us now have a new way to grow and monetize our video shows, and that is through the new features from Spotify for Creators. Growing your audience is a huge challenge that Spotify for Creators is helping you tackle head on. With Spotify for Creators, you can attract audiences with short form clips, engage your audience with comments and polls, and grow your show with their extended suite of tools. Something I've started doing is encouraging my podcast listeners to leave a comment on Spotify if they've enjoyed the episode. You can see here all the comments I've been receiving, which not only deepens my relationship with listeners, but also helps me learn more about them. Spotify also just opened up their very own partner program to get you paid. After you get accepted into the program, you can start to earn revenue from ads and even Spotify premium users who watch the episode ad-free. You can even run paid subscriptions through Spotify that connect to platforms like Patreon, Substack, or Supercast if you already have a membership. Growing a podcast is hard, but Spotify's chief product officer literally just said video is the fastest way to succeed on Spotify today. The time to get in early and take advantage of these new features is now. To learn more about Spotify's features to help you connect more deeply with your audience, click the link in the description. Thank you to Spotify for sponsoring this video. So let's talk about the end of cohort 1. How was that received by students at the end of the experience?
In the debrief that I did, I remember thinking, on the one hand, it went better than I could have imagined. And I enjoyed I think that was the key thing. I was like, I really wanted to find work that I just deeply enjoyed and cared about and felt rewarding. And the response, just the fact that like that many people signed up, and I got long like essays from people afterwards being like, this is both in terms of like the way it impacted them and also with ideas for feedback and improvements. There were a number of things that I think I did wrong. I think I put too much information up front, particularly in the live sessions. That's been a key learning, is that there's a tendency, especially when you're coming from a place of like, not quite sure of yourself, especially in the beginning. There's like, well, if I just give them more information, then that'll like, they'll deliver more value. But actually, what I've learned is that the real value is in the kind of deep distillation and the deep curation in what it is that you're teaching and how you share it. So I've definitely, in many ways, like stripped back some of the content that I shared in the first version, and then there've been so many learnings. Like there wasn't really a community aspect in the first version. It was like just kind of me talking, because people didn't really use Discord, and we switched to Circle for cohort 2, I think it was cohort 2, and that was a huge change. And I basically rewrote the curriculum between cohort 1 and cohort 2. It was like initially it was more breath focused. There was many other aspects that I was drawing in, and it was too complex, and it was disjointed. So and it took me a full year to kind of process what I went through, integrate the learnings, and then create the time and space to rewrite the curriculum for cohort 2. So I think a year elapsed between the first and second.
Was it immediately clear to you that you were going to run a second cohort?
Yes.
And did you have any worries about filling that cohort after getting so many people into cohort 1?
Yes.
Let's say more.
I mean, as I said before, or I said earlier, I didn't really have a big audience at that time. So I, was fairly active on Twitter, had a few people who'd been through one-off workshops, but I didn't really have a platform, so to speak. So I wasn't really sure where these people were going to come from. And I certainly didn't have any experience marketing anything like this before. So it was all it was all new to me. And the approach that I took, which is still the approach that I take now, is all around experiment design. So I attempt to form a bunch of like what are the best ideas that I have? And in this case, kind of going back to cohort 2, like how could I fill another cohort of people? Like where might these people come from? And then over I think it was like a 4-month period, I was like, okay, how many of these experiments can I run in that period of time? And will they work? Was basically what it was. And I'll say the other thing that was really helpful about using Notion in the beginning is that I could make so many tweaks to the landing page and just redesign stuff so much that in a way that I don't think I would have been able to if I was using Webflow or WordPress or something more complex.
Okay, I want to highlight a couple things. One, you just re-highlighted that the initial web page for this was built in Notion, which I see web pages built in Notion. I see sales pages built in Google Docs, and I think that's brilliant. That's really great, actually, because in those containers, expectations change. We don't expect a Notion document to look like a website, but we expect websites to look to some standard of what we expect for our market, right? Mm-hmm. But we know there are natural limitations to a Notion document, to a Google Doc. So we actually don't expect certain visuals because it just isn't what we see there. Mm-hmm. But you also highlighted that you said, I didn't have a large platform or audience. You said earlier you had a couple thousand people on an email list before cohort 1. Sitting here today, you have about 13,500 followers on Twitter, which is a platform you mentioned. Mm-hmm. And I'm sure that was lesser at the time. So I'm sharing these numbers just to help people benchmark themselves and where they are and what is possible. Because again, not only did you run cohort 2, but do you have any sense of the size of cohort 2 compared to cohort 1?
It was almost double. It was about 150 people, I think, back then. And the other thing I'll mention is the price point was quite a bit lower. So I think the first cohort, the price point was about $400. And then I increased it to $600. I kind of increased it by $200 every cohort was kind of like the way that I staggered it. So it felt like less of an ask in the beginning. But yeah, I think I had about double the number of students for cohort 2.
So what are these experiments that you ran? Which I love that this is your approach, by the way. And you've shared a lot of your experiments in the lab, which has just been some of my favorite posts that have ever happened in the community ever, because they're so well done and so in-depth. So what were some of the experiments that you ran before cohort 2 to bring in people from outside of your own audience?
I think the overall strategy, honestly, has been pretty similar since cohort two. It's for me, it's been a combination of sponsoring newsletters. So I read a lot of newsletters back then, and that was where I found out about interesting projects and like online learning things that I was really immersed in as well. So that was a good way for me to kind of test different audiences. And I believe, I think it was cohort 3 that I first sponsored Tiago's newsletter. I forget the exact timing, but some of these newsletters, they delivered like a 5 to 15 times return on investment.
Crazy.
So I was like, wait a minute, like if I can just find enough newsletters to sponsor, then this will fuel the entire cohort. And so that was a big kind of like light bulb moment for me.
Before we get to the next strategy, when we're talking about newsletters here, you didn't just sponsor any newsletter. How did you choose what newsletters that you wanted to pursue?
I think if I think about it, it comes back to trust. I think I chose the creators who I had the most amount of like trust in what they shared. And I think that is in a big way, the way that I think about marketing is like, how can you create and leverage trust? And what I love about newsletters is the people reading them, they already have developed a relationship with that creator. So Tiago, for example, has been writing for years and years and years. And so people have a high degree of trust in what he shares. And so if someone, and Tiago wrote a kind of personal blurb in one of these as well, which just went straight to the landing page. And what I'm thinking about now is like, okay, I'm realizing you need things like lead gen, and you need things like what was tripwire. I learned that word the other day. And, but I didn't have any of that. It was literally just a landing page, and people were just going to the landing page that was built on Notion, and that was converting a large number of students. So I'd say newsletters were a big one, and then also podcasts, which initially very small podcasts, people with a few thousand listeners. I got a lucky break, and I was on the One You Feed podcast, I think around cohort 2. By pure chance, the host followed me on Twitter and reached out, and that sent a fair number of students. But it was really just like, where do I pay attention? Basically, like, I listen to podcasts, I read newsletters, so I was like, I'll try and use those.
What you didn't say was that you went to newsletters that you knew your audience or target student read. Is that implicit, or is your market so broad that wasn't as important as just trust in the creator?
That's a good question. I think it's only recently that I've attempted to be a bit more defined about who my target student even is. Yeah, I think that and this is maybe another beneficial aspect, or good fortune that I've kind of stumbled into, in that I think there is a very broad audience of people who could benefit from this type of training. I think the bottleneck is actually more of people who want to take learning experiences online, and particularly through cohort-based courses. So one of my hypotheses was that if someone has already done a cohort-based course, let's say through Tiago's Building a Second Brain or Rite of Passage, then they are the sort of person who enjoys that particular flavor of learning experience. So that was, kind of going back in time.
Really good insight.
That was more what I was focusing on.
Yeah, because when you choose a niche, I don't love the word niche, but just for the sake of clarity here, when you choose a niche, you can either niche by type of person or the outcome. And I think a lot of people hear niche and they think, I need to define clearly who this person is that I'm targeting. But if you have a differentiated outcome, which in your case you do, we already mentioned, there aren't a lot of people talking about mastering your nervous system. That gives you this whole new axis to target potential students on. And, as a newsletter creator, as a podcast host, the magic of you coming to me to say, can I sponsor your newsletter? Do you want to put a podcast episode together? Is, once again, the subject matter you're teaching is so unique that I don't even know who else I would recommend if not for you. And you're going to pay me to do it? Great. Or you're going to come teach my audience something amazing. It's a win-win all around. And where people find trouble trying to sponsor newsletters or get on podcasts is they haven't done the very hard thing of differentiating themselves versus all the other people saying, let me sponsor your newsletter or let me be on your podcast. And so that host is just inundated with what feels like the same story from different people. And it's not a very compelling pitch. Your pitch out of the box is more compelling because the nature of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, that's so true. And the other thing that I think I did, which I still continue to do, is offering free live workshops for private communities, which I found to be really, really helpful. So I kind of did a fairly deep dive of like, who are all of the different private communities that offer or they invite guest speakers in. And I was like, I would love to, lead a 60-minute session for free for your community. And that felt like another way of getting into a community that has a decent degree of trust, and then also giving people a flavor, because it's such an experiential thing that I teach, and often it's quite hard to convey with just words. So that also, I think, really helped, especially in the early days, again, when I didn't really have an audience to lean on.
So smart, because again, I don't think there's going to be anyone that you approached who is competing with you directly. This is a hard thing about going into other communities and trying to do this. Like it's pretty clear that, well, Jonny's probably offering to do this because he knows some people are going to have a great experience and they might want to join his course.
Yep.
But if you deliver a great course or a great experience inside my community, and you're not, taking customers from me because we're not doing the same thing, again, everybody wins. There's not a problem here. When you differentiate very strongly, a whole world of collaboration opens up.
Yeah, I think the collaboration piece, and I've never really thought about things in terms of competition, and I think you're right that's in some ways, I've just been fortunate because of the path that I've gone down. Not many other people are really talking about this, so I've really had this view of like the kind of rising tide like lifts all boats, and a lot of, particularly in the later cohorts, exploring collaborations and doing kind of like trading guest workshops and supporting other creators who are related and adjacent to what I'm teaching. Like Michael Ashcroft is a good example. He teaches the Alexander technique and expanding awareness, and he came on as a guest lecturer, and many of his students have taken my course. And the same with Art of Accomplishment, which is another successful cohort-based course. We kind of do swaps and trades, and it's great because the students want to learn from all of these different areas, and it doesn't feel competitive in a way.
Totally. It's front of mind for me because the online business space is probably one of the most competitive, overserved markets that is out there. So in everything that I do, and a lot of people that come to me, there's a lot of shades of gray of, are we selling the same thing?
Totally.
Okay, well, let's go back to the end of cohort 2. Nearly doubled that. I'll ask you the same question I did after the end of cohort 1. Was it immediately obvious that you would do another live cohort after this? Because some people might think, let me turn this into a self-paced course. Let's put this thing on autopilot.
Again, it was so obvious. And I think that, I think like this was the point where I realized how lucky I felt, because I'd stumbled upon this intersection of something that I really cared about teaching. Like I was very passionate about the subject matter, something that I really believed helped other people, something that I really enjoyed putting together. As I mentioned, I just like love the challenges of curriculum design and like how to craft a meaningful learning experience, and something that was bringing in, even at this point, more money than I'd made in like the last kind of 2 to 3 years when I'd just been doing freelancing and working for a fairly low hourly rate. And so there was this sense of like, can I just keep this going? Like how far can I take this?
And how frequently were you running these at this point? How soon after cohort 1 did you run cohort 2? And how soon after cohort 2 did you run cohort 3?
Yeah, so the aim was to do every 6 months. I think, as I mentioned, I took a year between the first and second because I just had to redesign everything and rethink it from the ground up. But I settled upon this 6-month cadence, which I really, really like. And I think this is an underappreciated aspect of like, I think a lot of cohort creators burned out because they just did too many cohorts, and it's exhausting. Like it's tiring when you're, particularly in the marketing launch window, and the teaching is like a lot of energy output. And so for me, having this like seasonal approach where I would like have the sprint of marketing where I'm going on podcasts, I'm sponsoring newsletters, I'm writing more online, and then having the teaching, and then having a kind of reflection period, and then like a rest. Like I've been taking 2 to 3 months off pretty much at work, like after these cohorts, and then the cycle kind of gently ramps up about 2 to 3 months before the next cohort. So that's enabled it to be sustainable for me. It's allowed me to travel and explore other interests and have my own podcast in between. And I think that's been just a core part of what has allowed me to do 6 cohorts without getting exhausted.
The other nice thing about doing seasonal rotations like this, I would imagine, is it eliminates a lot of questions, because you just kind of fall into a rhythm where, you know, this is the week that we're running the course. This is when the application window starts. This is when we do this and do that. A lot of times as creators, we're just constantly living in a world of questions of, should I do this today? When should I do this? And when you have these 2 bookends to the year, I think it probably gives you some clarity over how you're spending your time.
It does. Yeah. And that ties into a really important point that I think, again, I was fortunate to discover early on, which is this idea of setting the creative constraints early on. Because I remember when I was first designing the first cohort, there's so many different ways that it could have been a $1,500 course. It could have been 8 weeks. It could have been, only live sessions, but making those decisions early on and creating that like container with these positive constraints allowed me to then create. And I think in another world, I could have very easily not had those constraints and then almost felt overwhelmed of like, how much do I charge? Do I cap the numbers? Because with online learning, there's so many different levers that you can pull. And I don't think there's necessarily a right or wrong way, but it's very easy to get stuck in the indecision and then just be paralyzed.
I would imagine it'd be easy for somebody first to go down the route of, I should just make this self-paced versus continuing to do the exhausting thing of running a live course. I would have also imagined that in between cohorts, it would be easy to fall into the mindset of, what can I be doing to grow my audience right now so that the next course I have more students? Does your mind go there? Or if not, how do you avoid that?
It does. And I don't view those kind of in-between periods as completely unproductive, but I think it's more that these ideas are percolating in my subconscious. And like, I might be journaling, I might be having conversations with, like this last cohort, I worked with Mark, who is my kind of YouTube general manager. And like in the downtime, I was like coming up with ideas of like, oh, this would make a fun video, or thinking this. It's like when the next wave of experiments were kind of coming up, but I wasn't actively engaged in them, so to speak.
Let's zoom forward a little bit through cohorts 4, 5, and now you're in 6. What has changed? What has stayed the same? And how has growth been between these cohorts? Have you continued this pace of growing cohort over cohort, or have things changed in some way?
Yeah. So in terms of the pace, they continued to grow even as I continued to increase the price, which was like every time I was like, oh, is this going to be too expensive? I was like, I felt nervous to charge more for what I was doing, and eventually settled on $1,400 as like the main price point. And yeah, I think it was like 150 students and then 200 students. And then this spring was 250. And then this most recent cohort has been like 200 new students. That I was a little bit like, I was, optimistically hoping the numbers to keep growing. I think for a number of reasons, people are, have Zoom fatigue. There's less people that have less cash than they did, during COVID times. But in terms of what's changed, I've really, and this is really the first time in my life that I've like, let's say like optimized something. Like I've been the guy who's just like always doing different experiments, always running different things. And I've always taken something to like 80% and then just got bored and kind of like moved on. But with this, I've really and I've sought help and expertise as well to support with this. But I really wanted to craft the most compelling learning experience that I'm capable of creating. And a big part of that circle has been amazingly helpful for crafting spaces, taking inspiration from communities like yours, who are really well organized, really well documented. And, every time I think probably the most helpful thing is just asking students for feedback afterwards, and then spending literally days and days and days going through all of the suggestions, all of the things, oh, I didn't like this, or this guest lecturer wasn't so good, or I lost interest here, and refining. And it is just this kind of constant feedback loop. both from my own intuition of like, oh, when I taught this didn't feel very good, or students were less engaged this time. I wonder what we could have done differently. So again, the experimental mindset comes into the actual delivery of the experience as much as it does the marketing and promotion.
Do you have other team members who help you run the cohorts?
I have one part-time community manager. Yeah. She's amazing. We have a cadence where she supports in the lead up in terms of kind of answering student questions. Then she's more or less full-time during the cohort, and then she helps with the reflections and the SOPs. I think that's something that I've been like other people doing cohorts. I know like have teams of like 4, 5, or 6 people, and I'm fortunate that I'm able to do lots of different things. I kind of have a background in marketing, so I can be doing the emails in ConvertKit. I can be refining the Notion page. I can be recording the audio in a nice microphone. So I think I have a lot of different skill sets. And at the same time, I've reached the point where I want to start bringing in more freelancers, because I'm realizing that whilst I can do certain things, I'm not the best. And there's other people out there that I can pay who can do a much better job.
I think a lot of where cohorts move towards headcount is the experience is based on this like interaction outside of sessions where like you apply what you learned, you submit homework. Now you need people reading your homework and giving you feedback. Is that part of your student experience?
Yeah. So we have a student handbook, we have a workbook, and then there's a kind of a questions for Jonny channel in the course, which I'm usually answering 4 to 5 questions a day. I'm a bit behind right now, so I was away for the last few days. And then in the live sessions as well, there's usually a Q&A period too. But it's not, because of the nature of what I'm teaching, there's not necessarily like homework per se. It's much more empowering students to run their own experiments and then sharing their experience and asking questions if questions arise. So I think, maybe if I was teaching LinkedIn mastery, it might be a different thing where I'd be like grading people on their LinkedIn profile or
right.
whatever it was.
Yeah, I think you've just designed such an elegant, differentiated, scalable thing, which is difficult to emulate in a competitive world, but aspirational. And I really encourage people to think about these things, because if you are intentional about the experience you design, the promise that you're making, it opens up these possibilities that you've shared here. You mentioned you raised the price between each cohort about $200. Mm-hmm. Where does that end? How will you know when you've arrived at the right steady state price?
I mean, this is probably a question for you, Jay. I'd love to, I'd love to have you coach me on that in a lab hot seat. I don't know. I think this cohort I'm exploring different pricing tiers. So kind of like lifetime access, VIP pieces. I look at what other people are doing, and I think having different options, maybe a self-paced version down the line as well. I feel hesitant around that, because I think that at least my experience of doing self-paced courses is I just don't finish them. And I buy them and then I just shelve them, and it doesn't leave me with a good experience. So I think I'm going to stick with the current price as it is. But what I'd like to do is create a series of probably self-paced, but like lower tier products that are specific to challenges. So like a 5-day anxiety course or a 10-day burnout kind of exploration. Because I think that niching down and kind of giving people those early experiences, particularly speaking to the pain that they're having, and then use that as an on-ramp to the flagship product, makes more sense as we continue to grow and I have more time to create separate standalone kind of side products.
This is a bit of a reaction, but I have a hypothesis that when you run a premium live experience, premium priced, and then you release a self-paced version that offers basically the same outcome, I think that has a negative, I think that pulls the audience demand of the price for the premium price thing down. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I think it makes a scarce thing more abundant, which just naturally draws the price down. And so, again, I'm kind of reacting, so take it with a grain of salt. But my immediate thought is I would not offer the same outcome in a self-paced fashion unless I was trying to transition away from doing the live experience.
Yeah.
I mean, we've heard and seen Tiago talk online about the impact of his book on attendance in the cohort-based course being a very negative impact financially. So it's something that it's an assumption I would make that, again, assumptions are assumptions. You just don't know until you test it. But the other thing I would think about in terms of pricing would be what is audience demand for that price? Where does the doubling of the cohort kind of stop? That means that you're probably getting to some sort of threshold. Could be audience size threshold, could be, all kinds of things, but that's one measure I would look at. Anyway, I just wanted to see how you were thinking about it currently. What you have this tier that I think is interesting of people can pay to have lifetime access. And you mentioned that in this current cohort, you have something like 73 returning students, which comes at some sort of administrative cost to you running the course, because these people are also sharing, they're looking for feedback from you. What's your experience been with offering the unlimited tier and having people come back?
Yeah, so it's been a new experiment running unlimited, but what I have noticed is that the returning alumni in many ways provide more value to the overall community, because they'll share their experience of the first cohort, the impact that it has, which I think increases motivation. There's already a sense of like trust and connection. And many of them, particularly the ones who want to return, are the ones that like really care deeply about this stuff. And so I've been wanting to incentivize people to come back for basically as like little as possible. If they can't afford it, then often I'll say, just drop me an email and I'd love to have you back for free. Because I do think there is a value. And, some students have taken the course like 4 or 5 times. I think someone's taken maybe all 6. And I love that, because I also they give me great feedback as well. So I'm kind of in this interesting question around the lifetime access. Like I like what Daniel does with Small Bets, where he just sells like a one-time fee for lifetime access to his community for all time. And I think that's the model that I want to move towards, because my experience of the last cohort was actually it was the most fun to run, and many of the students had the best experience, even though the size was kind of 300 plus people. And yeah, I have to answer more questions. And there's a little bit more admin, and like Zoom room management and breakout rooms can be a bit of a nightmare, but we've kind of dialed the systems to the degree where it just works. So that's something that I actually want to think about more deeply once this cohort ends, and think about how I'm going to structure it moving forward.
The Nervous System Mastery website has had a real glow up since your Notion days. It seems from the outside like you've been investing very strongly in design, aesthetic. Can you talk about that decision and what prompted it?
So this last cohort, I both invested in starting a YouTube channel and also redesigning the website and doing an overhaul there. With the website, I was personally really proud of how the design came out. I felt like it communicated the right vibe and aesthetic that I wanted. And at the same time, particularly when I first launched it, the conversion rates were significantly down from the simple Notion page. And part of me was kicking myself, did I do the classic thing of like create something really fancy and shiny that is just actually too complex, too long, people don't read it and they just kind of bounce and lose interest. So I'd like to do a deeper dive into the analytics again once this cohort ends and figure out, because I know that I think I had about twice as much traffic this launch period and fewer students. And I wonder if I'd had the previous landing page up, actually, if I would have converted more. So I think that's been a lesson for me around design feels good, but if it wasn't designed with kind of conversion in mind. So I think it's been a real insight for me.
That's so interesting and frustrating, because it's going to be really hard to know if that's true.
Yeah.
Like, how would you play out the counterfactual of that?
Exactly.
It'd be really hard to know, because to me, I look at this and I think it's beautiful. I think it's beautifully done. I think it lends a lot of credibility to the brand as a whole. I certainly would trust it more looking at this, but it may not be a trust thing, as you're saying. It may be the viewer, the reader experience. I don't know what type of like copy or structure changes you made. Did it mirror the structure and the copy pretty closely?
I mean, there was definitely a mirroring, but I added quite a bit more copy, and the font I think is less readable to some degree as well. And yeah, I think it's just so long and so lengthy that my sense is people lost interest easily. And I've actually made some changes kind of in the final couple of weeks to make particularly the header just a bit more bold and obvious. But it was more subtle in the beginning. And as you say, like I was questioning, is it because people are bored of online courses? Do they have less money? Have I reached the kind of saturation point? Or is it just like the website is just not as compelling as it was? And it's hilarious in a way that something that you can do in Notion so easily actually can be even more effective than something that does look that polished and kind of well put together.
Yeah, it's really interesting because this isn't even a long page. It's not a long page. And a lot of people would argue that longer sales pages are better because the people who want to purchase will purchase early and the people who are on the fence will keep reading further and further and further down. But I do think for products, there is sometimes this like threshold of there's enough information where people are be like, yes, that's enough. And then there's almost like this tipping point where maybe you introduce new questions into the mind and now you've like reintroduced questioning of the process and they think, oh, I'll come back and try this later. But again, super frustrating. Hard to know without like true A/B testing in real time because we'll never know. This moment in time where you marketed cohort 6, was there some sort of macroeconomic thing that was going on? Was it the time of year? Were there other forces at play? Really, really tough to know.
Yeah, there's one more thing that I'll maybe mention that might be useful for listeners is that I think part of the success from cohorts 2 to 5 was that I just had a lot of really good testimonials that were highlighted. Like a lot of the initial Notion page was just like testimonial after testimonial after testimonial. And I think those somewhat got hidden in the new version. Like you can still find some of them, but they're not as punchy as I think they were before. And I think the testimonials in the first version were just like, especially with some of the highlighted areas, were probably what did a lot of the trust building and the selling.
I agree with that. I would say that is an area of the page that feels like it feels easier to skim past in the way that it is. It feels like aesthetically nice, but it doesn't draw me in to read it.
Yeah, exactly.
You've been on a lot of great podcasts. You've been on Lenny Rachitsky's podcast. You've been on Modern Wisdom. You've been on Ali Abdaal's Deep Dive podcast. You mentioned the one you feed. These are large shows with large audiences that people would love to get on. And I think we already touched on differentiation being a part of the reason why the package of what you do is attractive. But did these people come to you or did you do outreach to get on some of these shows?
Yeah, great question. So with the Lenny episode, I wrote a guest post for Every, which is a kind of tech newsletter and magazine called The Operating Manual for Your Nervous System. Lenny happened to read it and share it, and I think, and then a few weeks later, he sent me I kind of like replied, so we just like developed a bit of a Twitter friendship, and he sent me a DM at one point, being like, "Do you want to come on my podcast?" I didn't even know he had a podcast at the time. I just saw he was this guy on Twitter with a large following. I didn't really know who he was, and in some ways, I kind of went into that quite naively, and when it launched. That catapulted the last cohort for me. It was I think like $80,000 worth of revenue from one podcast episode, and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of applications. And he was so like, he didn't ask for an affiliate fee or anything. He was just generously like, I want to learn about this and share this with my audience. So it was a moment for me of like, oh wow, like this is possible. And so after that, I then made a more intentional effort to kind of reach out to people that had podcasts that I thought would be aligned. Ali, I met through some mutual friends, and we happened to be at an event together where it made sense to record. And he's also been exploring this kind of work. And then he happened to be friends with Chris from Modern Wisdom, who was also in the process of exploring emotional and somatic work. So in that case, the introduction really made sense. It wasn't a kind of a big ask. But yeah, I think the way that I haven't been doing the traditional kind of like outreach or like cold emails. There's a few people who I think, oh, I'd love to have a conversation with that person, and gradually building relationships with some of these people. Also knowing that in many cases, I think there's like, you probably get like one chance on a lot of these podcasts. And so I would be fine if some of the bigger episodes happen in like 2, 3, 4 years time, when they'll probably have more impact, honestly. Like
Yes.
if I like burn through the podcast in like a 1 or 2 year period, then I actually think that would be a bit of a waste, frankly.
I completely agree with you. I don't think a lot of people would have thought that way or would have the patience to do that. And it takes things for granted to a certain extent, because you could make the argument like, well, if you could get on them now, you don't know that you will get on them in the future. But I agree with you that these are probably one hitters for the most part. And so being thoughtful about when you take that shot based on the experience you can deliver, the outcome you can deliver, I think is really, really smart.
Mm-hmm.
You just opened a loop in my mind. You said hundreds of applications and $80,000 of revenue from Lenny's podcast. I assume in your application, you ask, where did you hear about this? And that's how you're attributing students to that podcast?
Yeah, so I created a kind of attribution model where if they either use the code, so all of the podcasters or newsletters have a specific $250 kind of coupon code, which they can apply. And there's also a question of where did you hear about it? Where did you hear about the course? So yeah, I basically look at like either of those. Sometimes they're different and then I just kind of add them both in. But that's how the attribution's been working.
Did you make a code for this podcast?
I will.
All right. Use code CREATOR.
Great. Perfect.
Is there anything I haven't asked here that is a clear miss that I should have asked about this experience?
Yeah. I mean, the final thing I want to share is it's just been so much fun. I mean, I imagine a lot of people listening to this, there are ways in which they could make more money doing other jobs than being a creator. And I feel so fortunate that I've been able to find a way to make much, much, much more revenue than I was ever making in any previous work I've been doing, and in a way that feels so fun and so enlivening and something that I genuinely like look forward to. And so I think like, yeah, just for anyone listening, it's worth trying a bunch of different things until you find something that like really, really lands for you. And I'm super grateful to have also just met a lot of other people in this world as well. I imagine this is a big part of why you do what you do. It just attracts really great people. And I've built a lot of friendships through this. And I'd say that's maybe the other thing we didn't touch on is the real importance of like camaraderie and community in this journey. Like I had 3 or 4 friends who were slightly further ahead in the journey than me, who were so supportive and championing and, you know, sharing when I did a launch and giving me feedback. And I think if I'd been doing this in a vacuum, I actually don't know if I would have made it this far. Like it's been so helpful to be around other creators in teaching different niches or doing different things. But that has like, it's just made it fun and made it feel like I'm like part of like a tribe in a way. A tribe of people doing similar things and wanting to help each other out. And that spirit of like generosity and kind of like giving first, which I really feel from you as well, has been so much like a part of the journey.
To continue learning about how to build a successful course business, watch this video where Amy Porterfield breaks down how she turned a massive failure into a $100 million education business.